All right, Danny, welcome to the TMG People First podcast. Really glad that you stopped by. I'm really excited for this episode, for you to tell us what's all going to happen, all things economics here in Arizona, and really excited for this conversation. Danny is a senior economist at LED Pollock Company and has a vast, truly just a vast background in economic data and forecasting in the real estate space, and we're gonna learn a lot today. So thanks for stopping by, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, Jason, you know what to do.
Yeah, welcome, Danny.
Thank you.
So first question, it's a tough one. What's the first thing you think about when you wake up in the morning?
The first thing I think about when I wake up in the morning, probably what time is it?
You wake up at a different time every day?
And then where's my phone? And then what day is it? Are we approaching the weekend? Yes.
You're already ready.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So I wanted to ask you, how do you become an economist? Is that something you wanted to do? You fell into it? I know you went to ASU and have a little bit of an economic background there, but how does one become an economist?
Well, you don't think it's like a childhood dream?
I don't.
You know, just growing up.
Neither is insurance, so I get it,
Play
man.
with horses. And,
yeah.
No, it's interesting. My initial plan was that I was going to go to law school.
Okay.
I was going to be an attorney, and I think that's how I tricked my wife into marrying me. Is this prospect of being a high profile attorney? But when you want to go to law school, you can choose any major you want. There's no pre-law type of degree, and economics was one of those general requirements, and it was the first class I ever took that I actually wanted to read the book. It was just really interesting to me, and so I was like, oh, this is perfect. I get to study economics, get this undergrad. And then as I was graduating, I had a classmate in a capstone class. He said, I'm an intern at LED Pollock Company. Never heard of it. I didn't know you could have a job in economics. I thought it was just something that you studied and then you went and got into banking or something like that. So I sent my application in as I was waiting for responses from law schools. They hired me, and it was just a really interesting job from the get-go. On top of that, one of my first assignments was to read legal briefs and legislative statutes, and it was so boring. And I went home. My mother's an attorney, and I had never even thought of what you do as a job on a day-to-day basis. It was just kind of like, oh, I think that would suit me. And I asked my mother, I was like, is this what lawyers do? She's like, yeah, it's a lot of reading and a lot of writing. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I let those letters pass, and I've stayed there since. So I'm in my 19th year at LED Pollock Company, and it's been great.
Wow.
Cool.
What's the role of an economist, and what's the biggest misconception of an economist, meaning public perception of an economist?
Yeah, I think to me it's when I get questions, because it's usually a conversation stopper when what do you do? I'm an economist. And they're like, oh, and they don't
I'm an underwriter.
Yeah, and usually the next question is, oh, okay, so how's the stock market doing? And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, we can talk about the stock market. That's not what I do. So I think that's probably one thing, is just an economist can fill so many different roles. There's economists in literally every single industry out there. So it's just there's just a wide array. And so when someone asks what an economist does, I say I don't know, but I know this is what I do, and I can explain what I do. So we're very real estate focused, but it usually involves a lot of data, sitting in front of spreadsheets, doing data collection, data analysis, doing forecasting, and the common, supply and demand is a key phrase in economics, and that's what we really focus on. So that's that's as succinct as I could say. Is one economist could be doing vastly different things from another, depending on their scope and their industry.
And how are you measuring within that analysis? How are you measuring public, just public perception or public awareness around varying topics, right? So if the public wants to buy, like socially wants to buy real estate, or they're not wanting to buy real estate, or they're afraid, or they're bullish, or whatever that may be, how are you measuring the social part of the economy?
Well, on a real estate side, we're looking at, vacancy rates. We're looking at the velocity of that. We're looking at growth in rents, or we're looking at the pace of how things are being developed, and basically what's being developed, what's being absorbed from that development, and kind of looking at it from that point of view. So that's really what it is. I tell people, like, economics is a social science, and so it's like, but it doesn't, you may not think that as like when rents decline, that's actually a choice that people are making to move away from a certain asset class or towards another. We usually, there's lots of different metrics that we use too. Like, we've been in this housing shortage forever, and a quick rule of thumb is, if you're a homeowner, you just see house prices go up and you feel really good about yourself. But then, what we do is compare that to the rate of inflation. And if our prices are increasing at a rapidly higher than inflation is, then we see a housing shortage coming. So it's those kinds of things that there's lots of different ratios and metrics that you can use to do that analysis. And it really does boil down to, these are, a market is just a lot of different people making different choices with their money or with their feet, moving different places, or taking different jobs, getting the types of education that they're getting. It's just millions and millions of choices going on that boils down into the data.
So Danny brings up an interesting point, because I think most of us consumers think, is the market going up or is the market going down? And there's a few things that go into that you guys do a lot of that. So
yeah,
wanted to ask you, the Mahoney Group has been involved in a lot of real estate transactions. We have a national real estate practice, but all of our clients, almost all of them, are very interested in Maricopa County or the greater Phoenix area. And why is that? Why do you think that this is such an attractive market to develop multifamily? There's commercial, there's industrial. What makes Arizona, Phoenix, greater area so attractive?
Yeah, that we could talk about that forever. I will say this has been a multi-decade run of people being interested in Maricopa County, in Greater Phoenix, and in Arizona. People have been moving here in great quantities. They continue to. I would say it's been a great common. And right now we do have a ton of momentum, and a lot of places are looking at what Arizona is doing right, trying to see if they can implement the same policies. When we came out of the Great Recession, the Arizona legislature, took a hard look at, okay, we weren't ready for that, most like many other places. And how do we position ourselves so that we're not going to be as affected by, something like a bubble bursting in the real estate market? Because
it was painful, man.
Yeah, and everyone said, "Oh, that's Arizona. They're just a growth. It's either growth or nothing. If they're not growing, they're dying." But there was a concerted effort, and we were lucky enough to be part of that in doing basically a 50-state comparison of what's working in economic development. And what came out of that was a package that basically the legislature empowering what became the Arizona Commerce Authority, which before that was just the Department of Commerce, but made it a quasi-private public entity, empowered them, gave them funds, and it took another several years for that to gain momentum. But now you're seeing the fruits of that. When we're identified as a semiconductor hub, and all of the high tech manufacturing that's coming with it. I mean, the results we did not expect. The results have been so much greater than what we could have imagined. When the Arizona Commerce Authority was created, they created a lofty goal of trying to induce like $1.4 billion of capital investment per year. And if you look at the last 5 years, they've basically averaged something like $30 billion of capital investment. So, a huge piece of that is TSMC up in North Phoenix. But, and then the ripple effect of getting a giant like that, all their suppliers coming in. Amcor is another $2 billion project in Peoria that's going to be related to TSMC. But then you've got these huge companies where all the rest of them, I think, just kind of leverage the due diligence of these super large companies, saying, okay, well, they chose Arizona. Why did they choose Arizona? And then to come here and see we've got a business-friendly environment. We've got a tax structure that is very competitive. We've got places to grow, just a pro-growth mentality, and we've got cooperation among all the municipalities too. Like it's not competition, but it's like cooperation to find the best site, the thing that's most suitable, because we know that wherever these places end up, we're going to grow as a region.
Mm-hmm. So is there an industry that we still lack? I mean, I know we've had more semiconductor, healthcare. Obviously, we've been big in construction, real estate. Is there still an industry that you think that we can do a better job of attracting?
We just bang the drum of what we call base industry. So a base industry is an industry that could locate anywhere in the world. They produce their good or their service here, and then they export it outwards, which means money gets imported inwards. So wherever that, and that's a whole lot of different industries. The higher paying industries is in the high tech manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, research and development, biotech, things like that. And those are all targeted industries. So those are all industries that entities like the Arizona Commerce Authority or GPAC, they are very focused on bringing in high paying jobs and then base industry. So you're seeing a huge influx of announcements in the manufacturing industry. Mm-hmm. That's a huge thing. We used to have much more manufacturing employment as a percent of our total economy 40 years ago. We're on the rise again, but it's much less than we used to be when, kind of post World War II, we had all these companies like Boeing and Raytheon and, in the aerospace and defense industry that came in. But we've since kind of, as an economy grows too, it's much harder to move the needle. So, when we add a manufacturing job, we add another 2.5 kind of lower paying service. Healthcare, healthcare has been a huge, growth industry in our state. Tourism is also a base industry, bringing outside dollars in. And those, if you get outside of Metro Phoenix in the rural parts of the state, tourism is a huge piece of the pie for their economies. And so it's, those are somewhat lower paying jobs, but it's still really important, and it drives an economy forward.
So you don't see any, you use the word momentum, Phoenix market. How long do you think is this ride going to last?
Yeah, it's, we certainly don't want to rest on our laurels. Right now, there's additional efforts in the state looking at creating another statewide strategy to say, okay, we're basically in a really good starting point, but by the way, every other state is also making efforts to try to catch up, to try to implement these things. So, we look at a big piece is infrastructure. So, energy is going to be a huge issue. Again, this is nationwide, but with AI and the demands for electricity and other utilities, that's going to be a huge focus. Our transportation network needs to continue to keep up pace. Our workforce, just both workforce readiness and kind of upskilling and making sure that they're qualified for these advanced jobs that are coming into the state, and doing that, like we're importing a lot of talent as well. And so some people say, don't worry about it. You create the job, someone qualified will come in, and so we're importing a lot of talent. But I think the focus two should be on just homegrown talent and making sure our education system is up to par. Getting kids graduated, we're kind of, that's an underwhelming statistic on our high school graduation rates. Getting them into a post-secondary, it doesn't have to be four-year college, but getting them into a certificate, a degree or certificate or some sort of position where they're increasing their skills and qualified for these jobs that are coming.
Okay. You had talked about the housing shortage a moment ago. What type of impact does that play on the economy? One, and then two is, where the interest rates sit today. I know it's, competitive to 1980, but, not so much for the recent generation coming through.
Yeah.
What is that type of impact going to have, and what does that forecast look like?
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch. But yeah, I would say we are still in a housing shortage. I know, the multifamily sector really responded, and we're seeing a lot of deliveries in the apartment side. You may have apartment owners or developers that are, squirming a little bit because the rents have softened and they're coming down a little bit. It's actually a, kind of net positive for that renter to be able to get into something that's not going crazy like we saw in 2021 and 2022. But really, what it comes down to is we have essentially lost our one of those tools in the economic development toolbox of that we're a low cost of living state. We've lost that. If you look at on the housing side, we're still getting those folks coming in from the coasts that are like, if you come from California, you've never seen such a cheap house. When you move to Arizona or from Washington, we get imports from Chicago and the East Coast, but there are a lot of places in the country that are much more affordable, and we're actually losing like if you look at when people, we're a net increase, and really most of our population increase is from people deciding to move here. But when you look at, there are also people moving away from the state, and by and large, they are moving to lower cost of living areas. So that's become those, in basically the southern parts of the United States, even Texas. Texas is killing it, both on the employment side, and they've got cheaper housing there. So if we're not diligent in trying to, attack this problem, the employers are starting to ask the question now. So you're like, hey, here's your shovel-ready site, and they say, okay, that's great. Where do my employees live? Here's my salary profile. Now I'm looking at resale prices. The median resale price is $450,000. A new home is a median price of $500,000. So we're talking about six-figure salaries to afford a home, and so then we're turning to the rental side, and I think that's why you see, we keep questioning. We've always been 65% owner, 35% renter, and that's been the rule of thumb. But we keep questioning if we've reached an inflection point. When you look at higher cost of housing areas around the country, there's a much higher rental population, much higher ratio of renters, and we're seeing that in the demand. So, our single-family home construction has waned a little bit. We're down year over year, and the demand, the absorption of the multifamily. We're building more than it's being absorbed right now, but it's like 50% more tenants are showing up year after year. So like we've had 17,000 apartment units absorbed when we would have assumed 9,000. So we're really seeing that shift, and it's just kind of to me it's a household budget issue. We've priced out nearly 40% of the population that 10 years ago would have been a homeowner. So if you came into town and you were making $60,000, you could buy a home. You're a homeowner, and now it's $120,000, and there's just not as many of those jobs around. So we're and just the price differential. John Burns Real Estate just came out and said we're back to basically the 2005, 2006 era, where it's twice as expensive to pay that monthly mortgage than it is to rent. It's in the Phoenix area, it's like to look at an entry level home versus renting. it's like a $1,200 difference to try to make that jump from renting to owning. So it's just not penciling out for a lot of households.
So do you think when or if interest rates drop, this will help, or is it a bigger problem than just interest rates?
Interest rates going down will help dramatically. It's still going to be, the home prices have not really moved, and that's a function of that everyone has so much equity in their home. So we're seeing a lot of homes go on the market and not a lot of buyers, but it's not a forced sale. They're not in distress, and so they'll just cancel their listing and kind of stay in place. So we're seeing mobility drop because there's not a lot of movement going around. Nobody's trading out their 3% mortgage for a 6.5%.
And that's the key, right?
So
I wonder if I know you have friends down at the Capitol, but what if there was a bill that was like, hey, if you have a 3% mortgage, you can refinance into a 4%. Or something that is still
let you carry your mortgage with you to your next property.
Yeah,
I mean that would be wonderful. I think that would help encourage mobility, because there's if I'm a renter, and I have the wherewithal to move up into an entry level home. If no one's moving out of those entry level homes into their move up home because of this lock in effect that we have, then we're all kind of stuck. So. And we're basically right now at a point, we're 2 weeks away from a Fed decision for an interest rate cut.
Prediction?
We're basically at, and this is a market rate prediction. The markets have it at like a 98% chance that we'll see at least a 25%, a 25 basis point cut. Would love to see a 50. I think it's justified to do a 50 basis point cut because of the revisions that we had to employment. It was a scary revision when we got the last employment report. It said, okay, 73,000 jobs. But by the way, the last 2 months we deleted 250,000 jobs that we thought that we had gained, and they were almost basically in the 19,000 jobs. It's almost no jobs when you're looking at the United States. So and Jerome Powell said as much as if they had those revisions, they may have made a decision their last meeting. So I could see a catch up. Now, it doesn't necessarily affect our mortgage interest rates. The mortgage interest rate is more tied to the 10-year yield. And so if there's an expectation that inflation is going to continue. So basically it's just like, okay, if these tariffs stay in place and if that we are going to see sustained inflation, but the dual mandate by the Fed is full employment and low inflation. And if they've basically had the luxury of a resilient labor market for the last 3 years, where they could say, okay, we can focus entirely on getting this inflation under control, so we're going to increase these rates. But now they're seeing weakness in the labor market, and they're going to basically say, okay, we wanted 2% inflation, but this employment situation deserves attention, and so we were going to start cutting rates. That doesn't mean inflation's going away. Inflation can continue to go up, and so if we see those 10-year yields elevated, then we're going to see, and that happened last year. We had some Fed interest rate cuts last year, but the mortgage interest rate increased over that time. Mm-hmm. And then it's also a two-edged sword. If we see mortgage interest rates come down, it's likely because the economy is slowing and layoffs and potential recession. So it's like, do you weather a recession to get those interest rates down? So it's kind of there's a trade-off there. Yeah. Everyone's really hoping these interest rates come down, but it's like, does everybody know what that means? That means that the economy is slowing. We're going to get some layoffs. So there would be distress in the economy, and the silver lining would be lower interest rates.
I know we were talking a little bit about the commercial market right now, and that doesn't seem to have the same buzz as the housing market, with property values perhaps going down, occupancy rates down, interest rates up, right? So when you're looking at those impacts, how is that playing a role, and what's your take on the overall commercial real estate market right now?
Yeah, I mean, we can take them one by one because they're all in different situations. Multifamily and industrial, I think, are kind of in the same boat where we had this wave of new supply coming online. It's still it's still coming online as well, but then there's probably going to be a substantial drop next year and the year after to absorb that excess supply. So that's the multifamily market and the industrial market, where we saw just an incredible pace of deliveries, especially the large space that over 100,000 square foot type of footprint. Those vacancies are north of 16% now when they're used to 5%. The overall market, I think, is around 12%. So, but the demand, similar to multifamily, is very strong. We're getting a lot of manufacturing coming in, logistics and things like that. So the demand side is positive for both multifamily and industrial. We've just overbuilt temporarily, and I think that'll just be a transitory period of 1 to 2 years to absorb that supply, and then you're off to the races. Office continues to struggle, basically since COVID and people going remote. It just, I'd say that it just kind of wound the clock back in terms of the demand for office space. So it's almost like we weren't building a ton of it, but we just eliminated all of these occupants from office. And really there are still, because of the terms on these office leases, you've got a lot of available sublease space that sometimes doesn't get into the numbers. So there's more vacancy than usually is what's reported as direct vacancy. And you still have companies that are waiting for their lease to end and then still probably occupying office space, but maybe right sizing. So they go from 100,000 square feet down to 30,000 square feet, or they go from 20,000 down to 10. And we've just been wondering if the pendulum swings back to, you hear some companies say mandate to return to office, but it seems to have settled into a permanent shift to this hybrid workforce that I think workers, seem to prefer. And so again, for a place like Phoenix that is actively growing, it's just a matter of time that we just work through that supply. We still utilize office space. It's not an obsolete asset class. It's not like, why did we ever build offices? No, we still need offices, and we'll just kind of grow through that inventory. And then when you look at, kind of go Class A down to B, down to C, you're seeing some of those older properties, kind of repositioned or redeveloped. We're seeing office to industrial as a redevelopment concept, and we've seen some office to multifamily as well, but not as much as we thought might have occurred. Retail just is still doing very well. Retail has just stayed disciplined. Basically they had to lick their wounds after the Great Recession when they were speculatively building. Yeah. They were building ahead of population growth, and that's gone. So they're saying, okay, yeah, build all of your homes, and then we'll come in and put the fries or put the power center in. But we're seeing that development occur, and that's just a function of them staying very disciplined. And office too. Again, there's some rays of sunshine in the office market. There is more absorption now than completions, so we're not in negative absorption territory. And really, it's because everyone just stopped building office buildings. There's no speculative office development really going on. It'll be built to suit if they do develop it, and then just kind of waiting for that magic vacancy number to get to a point where they feel comfortable to continue.
So Jason and I were talking, in preparation for this about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And, we had some discussion on they're trying to make those public companies, right? Or there's some talk about that. Would that have any ripple effects in the overall economy and real estate, in your opinion?
I mean, you could talk more, if you want to talk more on that, because I haven't been following that very closely on what that might do. So no, I don't have any.
We don't know anything either. That's why we asked. No, but I'm sure it's just speculative, and they're trying to potentially do something like that there. You being an economist, I'd like to get some predictions out of you, and it's probably it's probably a lose-lose. If you're right, you're supposed to be right. This is your job, and if you're wrong, it's like, what? This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. It's like getting in a fight with someone that's a foot shorter than you.
I'm very comfortable with this. I'm very comfortable being wrong. I when somebody asks, like, "Well, didn't you predict that?" I was like, "I said that 3 days ago." That's no longer
The world has changed.
Yeah, that's no longer my base case. So,
Are you more accurate than the weatherman?
That's the baseline.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess my question would be in July 1st, 2026, what are interest rates for first-time home buyer?
Oh, mortgage interest rates. I think those are going to come down painfully slowly. So we're at around 6.5% or just north of that now. So again, I think the Fed will cut. I think the Fed will continue to cut into a kind of. We're basically at a point in the economy where we're not retracting, but we're slow. So we're growing, but we're slowing. And so I think the Fed will react to that point. So. But we have these tariffs that are coming on and pausing and coming back and being negotiated and they are creating inflation. Housing is a huge piece of the inflation calculation as well, and we haven't done anything to really affect that. So it's kind of this sticky. I think if everyone can get used to 3% inflation instead of 2% inflation, then we go. So I think the mortgage interest rate does come down, but it's going to be way slower than everybody wants. So if it's at 6.5 this year, maybe we could get down to 6% by July of 2026, and then the floor, which I think is another thing that nobody likes when I talk about it. The floor may eventually just be 5%. So those 3 and 4% mortgages may be, a thing of the past unless we get some sort of severe recession. So again, if you want your really, really low, mortgage interest rate, then we might have to weather something pretty bad. But so yeah, base case is, maybe a 0.5% down per year.
Okay. Multifamily rents, end of let's call it again, July 1 of 2026. I think they're going to go up from current because, as you said, there's a little bit of a softening in the greater Phoenix area. Do you predict they'll stay the same as they are now, go up or down?
They'll either flatten or go down slightly again. So because we still have something like 22 to 25,000 units under construction, and like I mentioned before, we hit about 17,000 units of absorption. So we're still going to outpace the absorption by these new renters. So that just creates competition. The concession rates are very high right now. These renters expect 6 to 8 weeks of free rent. I think that continues because it'll be a competitive environment. And the most competitive environment will be in that Class A space, the newly built, the luxury properties, because that's where a lot of the supply is coming online. So a lot of concession activity there. So, optimistically flat, but, base cases, continue to face the headwinds of that new supply coming on.
Okay. And then do you have any predictions you want him to make?
Yeah. What are some of I was going to ask him for sure. What are some of the leading indicators we should be looking for to watch a healthy economy continue down the path?
So like high frequency, like weekly stuff that comes out is like initial claims for unemployment. So that was released yesterday. That ticked up. It's like in the 235,000 range. I would say put your line at like 300,000 for like this. There's some trouble here. So again, the trend is going up on that, but it's still at a very low level. If you look back at 10, 15 years, kind of zoom out, you're like, okay, we're at a pretty low level here. So don't get too troubled by the trend in which it's going. But, if we hit that 300,000, that's probably some trouble in the labor market. The employment report, which comes out tomorrow, which will be interesting because, we had revisions to the last month's employment report. It resulted in the firing of the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so a very interesting reaction to that because, lower employment will actually result in lower interest rates, which is what the president wants. But the number wasn't beautiful, and so that person was fired. So that comes out on a monthly basis. So again, watching employment, I would put that as like, we want to see at least 100,000 jobs created each month in the United States. So we've been well below that. So our 6-month average is about 80,000 jobs. Our 3-month average is only 35,000 jobs. So over 100,000 jobs is healthy. Under 100,000, we're seeing some weakness there. Consumer sentiment, it's kind of like if you decide that you don't feel good, then we don't feel good. You decide the economy's not going well, and you stop spending money, and it can turn quickly, but it hasn't been as good of a predictor of recessions. So consumers right now are at a pretty low sentiment level now, and if you looked toward past recessions, this type of level of consumer sentiment was associated with a recession, but we haven't seen one. So this has led to a lot of my false prediction. I think I've come out, in the last 2 years saying, "Sorry guys, we're probably going to see a recession," and we have not. We've weathered the high interest rates. We've weathered the inflation. We've weathered some of these shocks, like the tariff announcements. So again, so we're in a pretty good space there, but consumer sentiment is something to watch. I also look at the ISM manufacturing index, I know everyone doesn't have all the time in the world to look at this data, but usually there's some places that will consolidate these and kind of see that. But the ISM manufacturing index is watching to see what our manufacturing sector is it either growing or contracting. And right now it's in a contraction, so it's any reading below 50. That sector is contracting, and usually, as the manufacturing goes, so goes a big chunk of the economy. And home building as well. So home building has been so resilient in the face of these high interest rates because they've been paying down everybody's interest rate. Yeah. So that's one other caveat is, if you are looking in the new home sector, you can expect, a 5% or a 4.5% rate because these builders are spending tens of thousands of dollars to buy down these buyers' rates. But if we see trouble in the home building industry, that's another indicator of economic conditions going forward.
All right. We're going to have you back on July 1st, 2026 and see what their predictions were actually right or wrong.
Not afraid of being wrong.
Oh man. Well, I really appreciate you stopping by. Is there anything else?
No, it's just, I just find it fascinating, right? I'm I think in my heart, I'm an economist with no skill.
I just want to clarify too. I hope that the tone doesn't feel, I just it sounds smart to be a little bit negative, and I just want to clarify. I don't feel negative about the.
You said momentum. You got optimism. You brought some energy. Yeah, you're good. I'm going to buy some real estate here.
Arizona and Greater Phoenix are on really great footing. We are still part of the overall U.S. economy and the world economy, and so when things happen there, we are affected. But if you look back historically, even in recessions, there's very few times where Greater Phoenix actually loses jobs in a recession. Yeah. We might go down, and then we usually boom out of those way ahead of the national average. So we're on really great footing. The effort that these economic development agencies has done in the state has been truly incredible. It's mind-boggling. Once you get into the billions, people, I think they lose sight of the scale of what that means. And also the win rate that these organizations have gotten. It's usually, industry standard is you win about 10% of these deals that are coming in, and the Commerce Authority is winning about 40% of their deals. So it's, they've built momentum, and I think like you mentioned before, it's you're just getting people coming interested. You're not actually going out to try to get them. And that's what's happening in the state is there's a lot of people coming in saying, what are you doing here? We're interested. And without the kind of financial incentives that a lot of other states are offering to these companies. So we're doing it kind of naturally, just based on where we're at, and it's going to be paramount to continue to be an attractive place to live, because that's where our growth comes from, is people deciding to decide to move and come to Arizona, and they have been for a very long time.
And we feel the same way. We're investing a lot in people here. We have one last question for you. What is one of the most rewarding things that you feel like not necessarily achieved, but done or been a part of in your career? This was a lot of data. This was a lot of economic information, but I guess we kind of want to, know the person a little bit. Could be part of your mission or, at your company or whatever. But what's one of the most rewarding things that you've been a part of in your career?
I would say I have a really soft heart for the affordable housing development community and the efforts that they're making to try to make a difference. Nonprofit organizations, municipalities that are wading into the waters of public housing and housing the most vulnerable among us. The market studies that we do for those individuals when they're applying for state tax credits or federal tax credits, it's the demand is infinite almost for that kind of housing, and then the resources available is just like a drop in the bucket. So all the efforts that we're doing to create housing for those types of households, whatever we supply in any given year is outpaced by the increase in demand. So I would love, I love being involved in that. I love being an advocate for it. We're a objective, non-biased third-party reviewer of the market for it. But based on the decades that I've been working on it, and the conclusion has always come out to be the exact same, is that there's an incredible demand for, homeless transition housing, housing for victims of domestic violence, for veterans, for seniors, and for families. It's just something that, I would love to see more resources towards. And so anytime that a project like that comes in, I'm always happy to be a part of it.
Love it. Well, Danny, thank you so much for stopping by. I learned a lot. Jason may leave us here and join the Economist Network. But yeah, we have a lot of real estate clients that are very invested in this area, and we really appreciate them as well. So thank you so much for stopping by.
Yeah, Danny, thank you. Appreciate it, man.
Oh, happy to have the conversation.
For sure.
Thank you.
Tune in to next week's episode with award-winning author and trusted advisor Larry Linney. This is TMG People First Podcast. See you next week.